Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for coming along. We're living in very difficult times, aren't we? And it's really great actually to be at a hacker camp. And I want to, before I start, I want to thank the Bornhack team for putting this on in such a difficult year and going through all the difficult stuff with the authorities and whatever. And I, for one, really appreciate the effort that's gone into this camp, and I'm very, very pleased to be here, and it's lovely to see you all again. My name's Jenny List. I write for Hackaday.com. I'm also a member of Oxford Hackspace and Milton Keynes Makerspace in the UK. And this talk, it's about what happened in the Hackspace community around the pandemic, and what we can learn from it, and how we might go forward from what we've learned in the future. So, 2020. It seems difficult to believe that, where are we, August? Sort of 7 or 8 months ago, none of this had happened. Can you imagine what 2020 would have been like if we just had a normal year? I'd have been to EMF for one, but it seems as though an entire decade has passed in 7 or 8 months. It's certainly, I think it's taxed all of us. Anyway, probably most of you are aware that governments were caught on the hop by COVID-19. I'm talking from a British perspective, so maybe the Danish government had it completely in hand, I don't know, maybe other governments did, but certainly for us, there were enormous shortages of PPE, personal protective equipment. The government had really messed up. There wasn't enough. There were doctors going without and having to treat patients. There were people in care homes in particular who just could not get hold of it. Excuse me, I just have to plug my laptop in again because the cable has fallen out. And this really became a bit of a national scandal because effectively people died because of it. And obviously in the Hackerspace and Makerspace community, we responded. We responded as only we can. We make stuff. So we made vast amounts of homemade PPE, and that's hackerspace communities, makerspace communities, sewing communities, textile communities, all sorts of people who make things. Did everything, laser cuts, face visors. The thing I printed was the ear savers, those little spiky things that go around the back of your head. I printed hundreds of those things. There were people making scrubs and scrub caps, and I don't think they were making gowns. I think gowns are something special for surgery, but they can make the scrubs for just wearing in the ward and stuff. And it was a huge effort, and I think it was quite successful. Certainly the recipients I saw, they were so desperate and they were so bowled over that just random members of the public were rising up to help them. And I remember a conversation a friend of mine had where she got through to the supply department, and they went through all the stuff about what they were offering, what the spec was and all that kind of stuff. And then she gets to the end and the supplies guy, well, send your bill to whichever the thing. And my friend said, no, this is free. We're making this and donating it. There was a long silence. I think the healthcare community were really rather bowled over by it. In the UK, it was all on a fairly local basis. So, for instance, we were dealing with our local hospital in Oxford. We were dealing in Milton Keynes. It was actually one of the doctors' practices there's a bunch of them all under one sort of overarching administration. And one of their doctors approached us, and we coordinated it through him. So we supplied a lot of face shields and things to a lot of the doctor's surgeries around Milton Keynes. The picture there, it's from my MK Makerspace friend, Christoph. That's actually packaged up face shield bands. They're 3D printed, and you hang a cut sheet of acrylic, is it? One of the plastics off the front to make the face shield, and those are bagged up. I think in there's all sanitized, and I think in all there's also one of the ear saver bands as well. And I don't know how many we supplied, but it was certainly in the significant number of thousands. You had everybody in MK who owned a 3D printer was banging out these things at home continuously for about a month or more. So it was a hell of a lot of stuff. The thing is, how did we do, and what did we learn? I mean, our strength in the hacker and makerspace communities and associated communities is we can make almost anything. I mean, it's kind of weird because we take it for granted that, you know, if you want something within reason, you can make something. I mean, people associated with our communities make everything from sort of satellites, people are making silicon chips, people are making things you used to need rocket budgets to pay for, and there's nothing in our community we can't make. So that was our strength. Where it doesn't work quite so well is we don't manufacture well. We can make stuff, but manufacturing, we're not really geared up for it. So for instance, here's me making the bands around the back of the neck. That's actually quite a simple one-piece of plastic. If I was gearing up a factory to do it, I would probably, I'm guessing, injection mold or something. I'm an electronic engineer, not a production engineer, but I would guess I'd injection mold, and I would be turning them out sort of once a second or whatever. But I was 3D printing them. It took my Creality Ender 3 Pro about an hour and 45 minutes to print 5 of them. And running all day, I printed an impressive amount. The fact is, what we needed at the time was simply, we just needed them to be made. And it wasn't the quickest way to make them, but it was the only way we could make them, so we made them. But under no circumstances is it what you'd call an efficient way to do it. So while we're good at making stuff, there's a difference between making and manufacturing. And it's something we've got to understand. We also have a huge culture of individuality. So everybody goes their own way. I am the genius engineer. I know this. You know, I can do this. And so we had a lot of duplicated effort. I know there were quite a lot of different, very similar designs for masks or whatever other thing people were making. Some of them were better than others. Some people, despite that one is better, I'm sticking with this one because I designed it. That kind of thing. There were a lot of sort of turf wars and stuff. And a lot of the same ground was gone over by more than one group. I mean, it's inevitable when you've got a group of disparate people, this is going to happen. There were also many duplicated forms of communication. I mean, there was all your usual Slacks and Signals and Facebooks and God knows what else, Telegram, WhatsApp, and they were all different things. And I had friends who were worn out, because they were constantly following about 6 or 7 different forums and conversations, basically going over the same topics, but different people. Oh, I'm on that WhatsApp group, I'm not on the Signal group or the Slack group or whatever. And, you know, oh, I'm with that lot, we're on this, we're not going in with you on that. And it sapped energy from people who should have been coordinating, making stuff, just dealing with all the communication. So that, we could learn from that. There was a lot of effort that was put into work that was very well-intentioned but not entirely useful. So, for instance, one of the big things early in the pandemic was that we would need millions of ventilators. And a lot of hackers said, okay, I'm going to design a ventilator. And I think any of us could design a ventilator. I could design a ventilator. It might even be a ventilator that works. But the trouble is, when you're hooking somebody up to a ventilator, you're actually on a machine that's keeping them alive. Now, I can make things. Would you trust me to stick a tube in you to keep you alive? To make a ventilator, I'm just using ventilators as an example, but there were other items of PPE and medical stuff. To make a ventilator, you design it, and you design it with the best possible engineers and materials and everything and the knowledge, the doctors that you can, and then you send it off. I don't know how it works because I'm not in that industry, but there will be a lot of medical trials and labs and tests, and everything. There will be things I can't even imagine as an electronic engineer, and it probably takes a lot of dollars and quite a lot of time before you get a stamp on it that says you can sell this to hospitals and they can plug patients into it. But there were hackers coming up with some really, really clever ventilators that would have done a really good job, and some downright lethal ideas. This will work as a ventilator. I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but there were ones where that will poison the patient, that will give them an infection, that will not give them enough oxygen, all these kind of things. And a lot of effort was being put into that, and that effort should have been put into stuff that would have actually helped. And so that's one of the things that's another thing we can learn. Then I'm afraid there were some egos involved. I mean, if you were involved in the PPE thing, you'll have had, different groups, and we're not talking to that group. We're in competition with that group. We're the only ones who do this. We're the other ones who do that. And there were probably in the UK there were about various different groupings doing things, and you were either with them or with them, and that lot didn't talk to them and so on. And I hope I am not going to annoy anybody by saying this, but yes, it happened. And fortunately, in MK, we managed to stay out of it. We were dealing with our local GP surgeries, and we just got on with it. And so it went well for us. But I know in some places they were more interested in who was doing it, going after sort of the glory, than they were in just getting the damn things into the hands of the medical people. And finally, funding and supply chains became saturated. I never counted them, but at one point there were loads and loads of different crowdfunders. So-and-so is doing this, so-and-so is doing that. And they're all basically doing the same thing. But somebody's going to give to the crowdfunder in MK. They're not going to give to the one in Luton or in Oxford or wherever. It became the point where nobody would make any money from a crowdfunder because there were just so many of them. I think that's held people back. There were certainly some groups I saw that were desperately trying to make this stuff, but basically ran out of money. And you can't expect something like this to be on the personal resources of the people involved, because ultimately we're all charitable, but the fact is somebody can't basically spend all their savings on something like this. It's not fair, and particularly when they're putting in the amount of time that was put in by quite a lot of them. And also supply chains became exhausted. There was a point where suddenly you could not get your hands on PETG filament for love nor money. And I think the price on PLA and PETG went right up. And I believe it hasn't come down. I may be wrong, but I seem to remember it was beforehand, in the before time, it was about 15 quid a kilogram on Amazon for a just normal roll of PLA. And I think it's somewhere above 20 quid now, about 20 quid. I haven't bought one, but certainly last time I looked, it was about that kind of ballpark. And there was a period where you just couldn't get it. And I know people were turning the place over to find, was it acrylic sheets, the see-through sheet for the visors. There were problems because everybody was after the same thing. Excuse me. So now that the industrial supply and the healthcare supply has kicked in to a greater or lesser extent, unfortunately in the UK, as is the wont of the UK government, they maybe didn't do the best job they should have done. They decreed from on high that PPE made by non-recognised manufacturers could not be used because it didn't have the right certifications and all that kind of stuff, despite the fact we had the certifications for the things we were putting in. I can't remember the exact rule, but there was some rule they put in. And they did that, so we suddenly had to basically stop. But unfortunately, they didn't have the supplies to supply the people. So we stopped because we would be prosecuted otherwise. And meanwhile, the nurses and whatever were desperate for PPE. The care homes, the old people's homes, they were basically just left to deal with it with nothing. And I remember, there was a period where these people were desperately ringing because they were trying to get hold of it. I'm told that there were even people who sort of didn't supply PPE, but it was, I've left some PPE over there. And that's not a way to go forward. I don't think they handled that very well. I mean, it's a political point about the British government, but if they could do something differently, it would be make sure when they stop the small makers making the stuff, make sure they've got some to supply themselves. If you want to Google the British approach to sourcing PPE, there are some nice juicy political scandals brewing in there. But as a community, now it's over. Well, now we're no longer making the large amounts. I think we can be proud of what we did. It's a dangerous trait in British society is to use Second World War metaphors, but I think we can say that as a maker community, it was our finest hour. We did help. We gave stuff to healthcare people. I am obviously talking from a British perspective here, but as far as I know, the same thing happened in other countries. I've heard it happened in France. I know it happened to a certain extent in the Netherlands. I presume a similar effort went underway in Denmark. Not having been there at the time, I can't obviously comment on that, but I know it was quite a lot of places around the world. We made a difference, and I think I'm proud. I think we can all be proud of what we did there. We also gained invaluable skill and experience. None of us had ever done anything like this before, and we effectively learned how to become small-scale manufacturers, how to become inefficient and not very good small-scale manufacturers, but we learned a lot. We learned a lot about certification of stuff. We learned a lot about how to prepare a product. So you saw those visors were bagged up and sterilized. We learned a lot about making effectively a production line to do that. And the thing is, that's all been learned. That's all been sort of knowledge that has been acquired. And we need to hang on to that. We need to say, okay, how could we do it better if it happened again? And how can we hang on for that? And how can we use it again in the future? Which really comes to the purpose of this talk. I'm going to take you back in history now. Now, I'm told there isn't an equivalent of this in Denmark, but there is in most other countries. In 1953, there was a freak flood in the North Sea. I believe it was a storm coupled with a particular tidal condition that caused all the water to sort of flood down into the southern North Sea. And there was widespread flooding in the east of England from sort of East Anglia, Norfolk, down to Essex. And there was also flooding in the western Netherlands. This picture here is an archive picture from Zeeland, the sort of bottom left-hand corner of the Netherlands. I know that there were significant deaths in the low-lying Eastern English regions, and it was a major disaster at the time. I know that the floods knocked out a lot of the communications, so the telephone system was pretty antiquated in the UK at the time, and it had been hit hard by the war, certainly, and when it was knocked out, the police didn't have any way of coordinating. And so they resorted to radio amateurs, and this isn't sort of your modern radio amateur with their little digital Chinese handheld. This is, you know, old-fashioned Morse code kind of HF shortwave radio amateurs. And the radio amateurs did a very good job. And afterwards, they came together as, look, we learned how to do something here. This might happen again. Let's hang on to that. And they formed a thing called RayNet. Now, RayNet is, I think it's Radio Amateur Emergency Network or something like that. And they train for disaster operations. I mean, you'll see them doing, you know, sort of communications for fun runs and all sorts of mundane things as training exercises, but they're there for in case something like that happens again. It's a model that has been exported all around the world since 1953. So, for instance, the Puerto Rican earthquake, I believe the American equivalent was helping there. And every now and then when there's a natural disaster, a volcano or a hurricane or something like that, actually, no, it wasn't an earthquake in Puerto Rico, it was a hurricane, yes. When there's a hurricane or a volcano or something, you'll see a bulletin, stay off this frequency, they're using it for emergency work. And so it's a very successful model of, we learned something from this, let's hang on to that and build it. And it's, here we are, 70 years later nearly, and it's still going strong and is all over the world ready to take up. I'm told the reason Denmark have one is that the Danish government have said, you don't need this, our radio communication system is strong enough to withstand anything. To which my response is, what could possibly go wrong? But I am not a Dane, so I cannot really comment. So I'm sort of sitting here thinking, how do we hang on to this? How do we sort of keep this going? How do we do a RayNet? And I came up with a few sort of things of, what would we want to do from this? And I'm going to read them out. To bring the flexibility and small-scale manufacturing strength of the hacker-maker communities together where necessary in response to emergencies. In other words, to be able to do this again, to retain that ability. And then to provide organised hacker-maker support to events, communities and community projects by way of training and preparation. So that means have an organised group analogous to RayNet, where I am part of the, let's say, hacker emergency response, whatever you want to call it, and I know that we're going to come together and let's say we're going to do something as a group training exercise as part of, I don't know, setting up a hacker camp or doing something for a community group or whatever things we can find to help keep those skills of working as a team, of making things, keep them active. So if there was another emergency or another pandemic, we know we're already a team, we can just spring into action, right, we know what we're doing, here's the thing we're making, here is the thing we're doing, we're just going to get on with it. And it would be nice to think, just as RayNet have become part of the amateur radio scenery, that such a thing might become part of the hacker and maker scenery. And the last one, to bring together the ingenuity and curiosity of our communities to create ready-to-go solutions to likely emergent problems, which basically means a lot of our time was spent designing the face shields, the masks, the bands, whatever we were making. And there are some things where if we had some likely scenarios, things we knew might well happen, we could then try to design things and have designs ready to go. So in the case of a pandemic, okay, we've had the experience with a pandemic, but in the case of a pandemic, we might say, right, here is the face shield that we are best able to build. Let's make sure we have enough knowledge, ability, and even materials in hand to make some of these if we need to. And I'm sure that, there could be a lot of brainstorming about what in-house knowledge and designs would need to be socked away, but I'm sure that our community could come up with a plan so that, a flood has happened, here is what they're likely to need, here are the designs, let's get making, that kind of thing. What are we not here to do? Now, this is a Hackaday piece I wrote a few years ago. And it was in response to spending a night in a hotel room, and the hotel was full, and I was actually given the adapted room for people with a disability. And of course you're lying there and you're looking at the different features of the room and you realise, oh, well, they haven't done a very good job there. This feature hasn't been very well implemented. I am an engineer. I could fix it. And you're imagining how, I would design it like that. And then at which point you think, hang on, I have fallen into a trap. I have fallen into the engineer savior trap, where I am an engineer, I can go in and sort out the problems of somebody less fortunate than myself, and this overwhelming smugness takes you over. I am such a good person. And of course, what you're actually doing is you're muscling in on somebody else's knowledge and applying your own ideas, rather than either listening to them and fixing the problems they want fixing, or helping them to fix their problems their way, or just standing back and letting them talk and speak. Effectively, you're speaking over people. So in this case, by emergency response, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, if this were to happen in our communities, it needs to be something for our emergencies. It needs to be something for emergencies that affect us. So things like the 1953 flood, things like the COVID-19. It shouldn't be, we're here to fix the emergencies of, say, a famine in a developing country or something like that. We all want to help. Our best bet to help something like that is to donate to agencies that do it the right way, don't go in as a white saviour, and who work with the people concerned. If you want to do hands-on stuff as an engineer or a hacker maker to do that kind of thing, there are even organisations you can join. I believe Engineers Without Borders is an organisation. This idea that I'm talking about is not there to become the engineer saviour. It's there to provide solutions for things that affect our communities. There are other ways to achieve help for disasters in other parts of the world or to other people. So how would you do this? Now, I'm not setting myself up as somebody who's going to do this. I'm also not setting myself up as a guru on this. I worry that you're going to get people saying, oh, I single-handedly saved the health service with all the work I did. I didn't save the health service. I was a very, very small cog in somebody else's machine. And this is my observations of what happened, but it's not my expertise as the person who saved the world. It's a case of I sat there printing these ear things, these ear saver thingies, and I was observing people. So this is very much my personal sort of, how would I like to see this done? And the idea is to set people thinking and see if anybody takes the bait and takes this kind of idea forward. So use RayNet as a model. RayNet works, see how RayNet works, see how it is organised, and shamelessly copy it. If it works, don't reinvent it. I'm guessing that something like this would have to be an entity, something like a charity or non-profit company or something. I don't know how these things work, but you'd probably need something for legal liability. I would say very clearly a national organisation rather than an international one, because herding hackers is bad enough locally. Herding hackers internationally would be an absolute disaster. The advantage you get from this is centralisation of all the things that were duplicated. So I've put funding channels here. So instead of 50 or 60, hundreds crowdfunders, have one funding appeal, have one clear message, have one set of relationships with sponsors. Because if you're a big organisation, you can attract big sponsors. You can talk to the right people. There are people who know what they're doing with that. The people I probably wouldn't know how to approach the sponsor, but I guarantee you there will be people who could. And similarly, the certification and design stuff. Certification is a hardcore thing. It's something I know nothing about, but yet again, in our community, there are people who know this. Why have lots of little hackerspaces struggling with certification, where somewhere in our community, there's probably somebody who is a medical engineer and does it for a living? This is why centralization, you access so much broader array of resources. And finally, similar to what RayNet do when they're doing the radio communications for a fun run or a village fete or whatever, is do manufacturing runs. Okay, you want to set up expertise in making face shields, make some face shields. And if you do that, you probably also end up with a bit of a stock of face shields. So if there's another medical disaster, then hey, you can start handing them out straight away. You don't have to get up and running. As I say, I think probably the best way to hang on to this knowledge is to practice. And so our community would have to come up with some way of practicing, becoming a well-oiled team, and using that to hold on to the knowledge. At a local level, all our makerspaces, we have to think, how could we have done this better? How could we have made stuff quicker? And yes, we've all got 3D printers and laser cutters, and we did a good job with those, but there are other things. So, for instance, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if we had injection molding? And there will be other things which I haven't thought of, which could similarly have made it so much easier. If Milton Keynes Makerspace had an injection molding machine for those ear savers, instead of churning out 5 every nearly 2 hours, I could probably turn out 5 in 5 minutes. I'm not skilled in injection molding, but I'm guessing industrial injection moldings probably turn out 500 in 5 minutes, but that's a bit optimistic. It would make sense for us to think, how can we extend our capabilities to do more stuff? And this is good beyond this. It's not just that we might make some face shields. I don't know about you, but I'd quite like my hackerspace to have an injection molding machine. There's all sorts of cool things I can do with that. We also need to embrace emergency manufacturing as part of our culture, in the same way that radio amateurs have embraced Raynet. Raynet is just part of amateur radio. It's one of the many different facets of amateur radio. And if you know radio amateurs, there'll be the guys that do homebrew radios, there'll be the guys that do shortwave DX, there will be the Morse enthusiasts, the satellite people, and there will be the people, Raynet is their thing. And we all know what Raynet is, and we recognise it as this is part of what radio amateurs do. And similarly, we could embrace emergency manufacture as part of hackerspace culture. Hackerspaces squabble a lot, we 3D print things, we laser cut, but we also do emergency manufacture when there is a pandemic or another disaster. And that would be easy to embrace. And the great thing is, this is a wonderful public relations thing. We can say, in Milton Keynes Makerspace in the future, when we're after grants or whatever, we'll be saying, look, we did this during the pandemic. We supplied stuff to the doctors. And we need to proselytise. We need to tell people, you've heard of hackers, you think we're a hackerspace, you probably think we're computer criminals. This is what we actually did. And they'll go, oh, wow, that's quite something. We should make more of what we do. Sometimes we're a bit quiet and sort of geeky about stuff, but we can be proud of this. We should tell people. And that's it. I don't know whether this talk or others like it, I'm told there's a guy in France has been saying similar things at one of their events. I don't know whether it will sort of start a spark, but I believe that we have come up with something valuable here, and it could become something special. And I do hope that somewhere out there will be people who agree with me. Anyway, yes, I've been Jenny List. You can find me Twitter, Jenny Alto, or if you go to Hackaday, you can find all the wonderful things I have written. Thank you very much. Now, do any of you have any questions? Hello.
What have you experienced being with how people kind of their reactions to getting involved in speaking from the next movement, from the hacker spaces? I've kind of seen that a huge part of it has also kind of been that the motivating part of it, seeing that some physical person actually supported them in their work.
Oh, yes. I better repeat it. Yeah, it's what's my experience of the reaction of the recipients, and in particular, have they responded to seeing people actually coming out and supporting them? Is that right? Yeah. Well, I know that certainly the people I dealt with were very, very, very pleased indeed to have some people who were actually helping them. There were desperate measures being taken. It did the rounds on social media that there was an online shop that was that's not safe for work. Hey, we're a daytime talk here, but there was an online shop that was specialist in medical fetish wear. And alongside all the sort of instruments, they also had a stock of scrubs. And they actually got a call from a major NHS hospital asking to buy all their scrubs. And what they actually did was said, no, don't buy it, have it. And they basically penned a very snotty letter saying, look, you shouldn't have to leave hospitals in a position where they have to approach fetish shops to get stuff that the government should provide. So I know that certainly, I mean, I supplied directly doctors' surgeries and old people's home, and they were so chuffed. And they were absolutely bowled over that we weren't demanding payment. I mean, hell, we could have made a fortune. We could have written bills, like, okay, there are some scandals at the moment about associates of our Conservative government having been given multi-million-pound contracts which delivered worthless face masks. We could have written some great bill and they would have probably paid it. They were so desperate. But we're not in that business. We were there to get the stuff in the hands of the people. And they couldn't believe it when that happened. They were bowled over. And that wasn't why you did it. You don't do it to have a sort of a nurse pat you on the back or something. You do it to get the stuff. But then again, it was great to see that that our intended customers were pleased with what we were doing. Yeah. Anybody else? Hello. Oh, yes. I didn't encounter that. I don't think anybody was making something protected by IP. I think the face mask thing was, I believe it was a Joseph Prusa design. Am I right? I think it was started as a Joseph Prusa design, and then it was sort of modified and made better and iteratively improved. So obviously Joseph Prusa had made it open source. I know the thing around the back of my neck was open source. As far as I am aware, it was some hospital researchers. They needed those valves here and now. They didn't need a six-week waiting time from the States, so they just printed them. They're hospital researchers. They know what they're doing. Hackers and makers probably don't. I think, I may be wrong, but I think I'm right in remembering that the medical devices company got so much bad publicity they backed down on it. Did they? You would have to Google that. I'm kind of remembering this. Yet again, it's the whole, this 6 months has been a decade long. But no, I was unaware of anything like that, but it was because we weren't going into very IP protected environments. I mean, pretty much everything we were doing you can actually download from Thingiverse or GitHub or whatever site it is on. Yeah. Anybody else? Gosh. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a lovely audience. And thank the video guys. They put in an enormous amount of work here. Thank you.